Welcome to the Mindful Leadership Podcast. How do we navigate through all the noise, distractions, and pressures to make thoughtful, conscious decisions that are better for us, our people, our customers, and our organization? How do we know if we're busy and effective or just too busy to be effective? In this podcast, we talk to leaders who share their stories about challenging existing paradigms and doing different things differently. I'm your host, Shahana Banerjee, founder and CEO of Just Human, Not Resources, on a mission to humanize the future of work. In this episode, we bust many networking myths and dive into how to build networks authentically with Pat Hedley. She's an independent board director, TEDx speaker, author, and former managing director at General Atlantic. She's on a mission to help people overcome their reluctance and tap into the power of networks to learn and grow. Pat, I'm so thrilled to have you on our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with you.
Thank you. We started the Mindful Leadership Podcast to showcase leaders who connect who they are with how they lead, with how they translate the purpose into everyday actions. And you certainly exemplified that. So I am so excited for our listeners to get to know you better.
I am excited to share, and thank you so much for having me.
So let's dive right in. Tell us your journey, the people, the experiences, and the influences that have shaped you into who you are. You have such a storied career. We'd love to know more.
I grew up in northern New Jersey. My parents were immigrants from Hungary. My first language was Hungarian. My parents sent me to school without having any background in English. So I don't remember how traumatic that might have been, but I did manage through that. My mom was an entrepreneur and my father was a social worker. So a realist and an idealist together. That is the background from which I come.
What a combination.
Growing up with an entrepreneur was an incredible experience for me. And it really set the stage for my career. My mom had a data entry service, which is basically typing. My sister and I helped her and worked at an early age. Honestly, it was not fun, but it taught me a lot of lessons. And I think the few important lessons were that, if you're doing something that may not be so much fun, it's somewhat routine, it's good to get through it. And it's good to be able to persevere. And I certainly learned that. And I also learned it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. and education was going to find a way out of that and elevate the kind of things that I might be able to do in business. And so I decided to study computer science. And this was many decades ago when it was somewhat early for a female to do that. And I never ended up coding. I did it so that I would always have a job. I always have, but not as a software engineer or coder. But it taught me some very important lessons in terms of how you approach problems in a structured way. It taught me frameworks and structured thinking that have been very valuable in all the work that I have done. I started working for Bain & Company as a consultant. And it was a tremendous experience. And one of the most important lessons I took away from there, although I didn't recognize it at the time, was that I did not have to be an expert in everything. In fact, the most important skill that I could develop over time was to find others who were experts and learn quickly and synthesize information and make it useful and valuable for whatever the task was that I had to do. And that served me very well later in my career when I was asked to do things that I was not particularly qualified for. I didn't have the background or experience, but I wasn't afraid of it because I knew I could figure it out. I had worked as a consultant for a couple of years. I went to business school. I thought I would look at banking for the summer between my 2 years. I got a job. And a week later, I got a letter from a firm I didn't know saying, come and interview. And I'm dating myself, but I could not text and say, no, I'm so sorry, I already have a job, and politely decline. I actually showed up in person in my jeans to cancel that interview. And the short version of the story is that they wanted to talk. And I was perfectly willing to have a conversation. I wasn't looking for another job. one thing led to another, and I ended up fulfilling my commitment to the bank. But I spent the extra 3 weeks I had in the summer working for this firm. I worked for them
Wow.
part-time during my second year, and I joined General Atlantic full-time after graduating from business school and stayed for almost 30 years. There are so many lessons, even from that experience. One is showing up in person changes everything. If I
Right.
hadn't shown up in person, I don't think I would have had this career. I would have had another one. Being open minded and having conversations with people is a really good thing to do. You'll always learn. You don't know what doors will open, but having those conversations is very important. And another very important lesson is in a business setting, when someone says no, it doesn't necessarily mean no forever. And I said no. The people I spoke with recognized that it was just no because I had a commitment and I made a commitment I was going to fulfill that, but didn't mean no, I couldn't work later. No, I couldn't work part time. No, I wouldn't be interested full time. And in fact, I was interested. And it was a life-changing experience to have that opportunity. And I truly have gratitude to the individuals who were kind enough to have conversations, even though I was being reluctant at the time.
Right.
I had a wonderful, wonderful long career, learned many things, but I think the couple of themes that you see here are be open-minded, have conversations, build relationships, be curious, and be open to a little bit of serendipity.
Yeah. It is such an important reminder, Pat, what you're saying, because we get so busy in life. We look at conversation sometimes as a chore. And what you're saying is that every conversation can be a door into a magical world or into something that is unexpected. You would never find out if you don't open that door.
I completely agree with that. And those conversations, in fact, can occur anywhere. Putting yourself in the way of serendipity. That's what opens opportunities that you otherwise might not expect.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. You've been such a vocal advocate and proponent of networking. Could you perhaps share a story or an example of how it's impacted you in your own life and career?
Yes, of course. I think that most people don't recognize that in their careers, even if they're not in sales or marketing, they really are. When you're selling whatever it is that you do well, you are selling that to somebody else. And building relationships, finding out who your audience might be, is really very critical. So when I first started at General Atlantic, one of the things I had to do early on was make cold calls, reach out to people and find out who would be those companies that might be interesting companies for us to invest in. And if you did that regularly, it's a very good exercise because it helps you with your pitch. It helps you understand the person at the other end of the conversation so you can learn what they need, what resonates with them, how you might have a conversation. And what I learned early on, and nobody taught it to me, was that my real goal in an outreach was to have an in-person meeting. And so I had to share and talk enough so that I could say, we are going to be in town. We'd love to meet with you for a certain prospect that was attractive to us.
Right, right.
That's networking. Now, if I could get to individuals through other warm referral sources, that's also networking. It's the idea of trying to build relationships. And I observed my colleagues, especially those that were particularly successful, part of their value was who they knew. Part of their value was how quickly they can access resources that were important or necessary or could be helpful to us. The more people you know, the more knowledgeable you are, the more quickly you can access resources, the more effective you can be at your own job. Building that network, both internally of who are the people that will be helpful and that you can be helpful to as well, but externally is just as important because it gives you context.
Right. Could you perhaps think of another example or story where it might have helped you in your life or your career?
I was given in 2 occasions during my time with my former firm what I call blank sheet of paper opportunities. So I was given an opportunity for a new role to head up. At the time, it was just marketing. I didn't know that much about marketing. That was not what I studied. It was not an area that I focused on. But what I decided to do was to make it broader. I decided to call it global marketing and communications. And I went out of the firm and sought experts who could tell me and show me what they had done. So
Mm.
very much like a consulting assignment, and this is where my work at Bain taught this to me. I went and I found counterparts in other firms who were doing exactly the same thing. I went and talked to vendors who were providing services to firms such as mine to learn what they were doing and how to think about it. I created a whole role for myself without too much knowledge to start by building a network around it. And I did this once again several years after that when I was given a role to head up what was called external human capital. So, working with the companies in which we invested on board development, C-level search, and talent best practices. And I was not a search executive, I was not an HR professional. I had been an investor by background, but I knew I could find other people. This role was very new at the time my firm considered developing it. And so I went and I talked to other people. I found out from my own colleagues, who should I talk to? Who has done this before? And then I said, tell me what you did. What were some of the easy wins? What was the way in which you built this role? Who were the people that you relied on? And through that process of interviewing others, I became knowledgeable on what I needed to do, and I was able to add value. A lot of people go into new roles, and I don't like the term imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is really, I need to learn more. I feel uncomfortable because I don't know as much as I think other people might know. So it really is, I need to spend time and effort to talk to others, to learn very quickly so that I can feel more comfortable in this new area.
There are so many insights in what you said, Pat. I think two things that really stand out and that are really powerful. One, reframing imposter syndrome to how can I learn more? Oh my
Right.
God, I don't think I've heard it said ever, and that's phenomenal. It's a great way to reframe it, where you're sort of translating your self-doubt and fear into positive actions
Right.
that help you get to that place that you want to get to. And the
That's
second
exactly right.
thing, right. And the second thing you said, how do you tap into the collective wisdom of your network in order to learn and grow? Because if you're going into a new role, for example, yes, you can certainly search, on Google, but you would never learn the nuances and the deeper secrets of how do you make something like that work without the collective wisdom of people who are already doing it. So that's a really, really powerful lesson. And thank you for sharing that. Your passion for this topic clearly comes through. You've had such a storied career that's led you through entrepreneurship, computer science, consulting, and then private equity. And now, you're an author. You've written the book, Meet 100 People. It seems like the topic you picked, the networking or relationship building, is really close to your heart. You're passionate about it. It seems closely aligned to your purpose, as well as it's almost more like a calling. Why is it so important to you to spread the message about relationship building and networking and champion that cause?
The reason it's as important to me is in part because I understand the reluctance some people face.
Right.
And by nature, I'm a reserved person. I did not fully appreciate how important this was until much later in my career. And I would love to help accelerate the path of younger people by spreading this message. I understand the reluctance because I share some of that reluctance. There is part of me, and I remember many times going to conferences where I would go to an event and feel very uncomfortable. And part of the reason anyone would go to a conference and feel uncomfortable, especially if they're the only ones there and they don't know other people, is because it is very intimidating to be in a very large room of lots of people that you don't know.
Right.
And the reason it's so intimidating is because somewhere in the back of your mind, you think you need to meet everybody there. And that is something that I learned over time is not at all the case. I remember going to a conference and feeling very overwhelmed. I had met people. It was a lovely conference, but it was a little too much for my glass of meeting people. And I said to myself, you know what? I need to take a break. I need to leave the room. I need to just, decompress for a moment. And then I thought to myself, you're at this event. There are so many people here. If you don't take advantage of it, you're wasting it. So go back in there and meet just one more person. And I did.
Wow.
I went back, and a woman who I knew well immediately embraced me and said, I have somebody for you to meet. And she introduced me to someone. We had a lovely conversation. I ended up investing in her business, and she has become a friend. I knew that at a certain point I needed a break, and that's okay. And I understand that. And I encourage people to think that. And I also knew that I couldn't go in there thinking I was going to meet 20 new people. I needed to meet one, and that makes a difference. And I will tell you a story very similar. This happened to me about a month ago. I'm a mentor for a group called Techstars, incredible group that is an accelerator program for young entrepreneurs. I went to the final demo day at this Techstar event. There were probably 200-300 people there. And I sat down next to a young woman. And we started to talk. She said, so many people, it's a little overwhelming. And I said, I have a different philosophy on this now. For me, a huge win is having 2 people that I actually follow up with. It's not having 10 contacts and cards that I take back. And that young woman, I started to chat. We really connected. We just had lunch in New York yesterday. I'm going to follow up. We are building a relationship. I think she found value in spending time with me. I absolutely found value in spending time with her. That conference and going to that event is a huge success in my book. I met one person brand new person I'm developing a relationship with. And so for those people similar to me, where networking may not be the most comfortable thing you think about, you have to reframe it. And you have to meet 100 people is not something you do today. Meet 100 people is something you do over time. The consistency of it matters. If you meet one person per week for a whole year, you will have met 52 people. That's more than the 52 that you have today. And then the final piece for me personally, and I could not have told you this many years ago, I could not have put my finger on the one thing that will make networking fun for me. And that one thing for me, and I recognize this about myself, is I'm deeply curious. I actually really like to learn. I get excited when I see something new. I kind of find talking to people like reading a book. I want to know more. I want to understand. I want to ask questions because I truly fundamentally believe everybody has something to offer. Many people have lots of jewels in their treasure chest of knowledge and experience and contacts. It's really fun when you think of it as I'm learning and I'm sharing. And there's something special and magical about that. So those 2 things, like don't be overwhelmed, take it bit by bit, do it consistently, and then find out what it is about yourself that can make it enjoyable.
Yeah. Pat, I think you have done the impossible. You have managed to, in some way, take the superficiality out of networking. When you think about networking, there are 2 kinds of people, right? There are people who absolutely love it. And there are people like me, I think, who absolutely hate it. And I think a lot of the introverts, right, in the I hate it camp, typically have the same reluctance that you talked about, which is it is too superficial. It's a lot of self-promotion. There is this whole awkwardness and small talk that you have to get through. And I think we also tend to put too much pressure on ourselves to make that one conversation very big. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Put too much into that conversation rather than see that conversation as a stepping stone to another conversation.
Right.
And so I think what you're sort of doing is busting a lot of these age-old myths about what networking is and what networking is not. And I think, like me, you don't really like the term networking. You are much more about building relationships. So talk a little bit about what that journey has been like for you.
I think if you have a human conversation, something good will result. And the goal is to learn a little bit beyond the surface level of the person.
Right.
To go to what a professor that I know once called your second story. I think the first story is what you have on LinkedIn, like I said at the beginning. Right. But your second story is who you really are, right. What hardships you might have overcome, what your background is, so what your worldview is colored by, what you've experienced. I, in fact, met somebody brand new yesterday for lunch who was introduced to me by a mutual contact, somebody who I respect and like very much. And I did not know this person at all. We had a truly lovely conversation once we scratched the surface a little deeper and understood each other's background. We learned that we both grew up miles from one another. We had similar immigrant type of experiences. This individual was a lawyer and was a very senior executive at a large company, the only woman in many rooms. I mean, there were so many similarities that we shared through our stories and talking about ourselves. By the end of it, we really felt a bond with one another. I went away feeling really good about this conversation. I don't know where it will lead. I have thought about people this individual can meet and ways that I can be helpful. I'm sure she'll keep me in mind in the future too. But it was truly a absolutely pleasant and lovely conversation. And she sent me the nicest note in the morning, to which I replied as well. And that's kind of the goal.
A lot of people have the discomfort, especially approaching more senior people, saying, oh my God, why would they ever want to spend time with me? What could I possibly have to offer? Why would they see any value in having a conversation? How do you get past that discomfort and that awkwardness? How do you really build a meaningful connection? What advice do you have for our listeners?
I think it's an excellent question. First of all, we have to bust some myths once again. And one worry is that the senior person does not want to spend time with somebody younger.
Right.
And I will tell you, senior people do want to pay it forward. You have to be approached the right way. And we could talk about what that right way is. When approached the right way or introduced by someone else, they do want to spend the time. And the issue for the younger person is not to impress that more experienced person, but to show authentic curiosity and a desire to learn. And that means that younger individual has to listen and be humble. And I think if you approach people with that level of humility, especially if you're earlier in your career, and say, I'd love to learn from you. Would you be willing to spend 20 minutes with me? I'd love to learn about this, this, and this, because my goals are the following.
Right. And so could you share one of those stories, Pat?
When I wrote the book, I have been speaking at events. And at one event, and this was, for my college, women who are graduated from my college, a young woman came up to me and said, would you have coffee with me? I would like to be in consulting. I'm at a small company. I said, of course, I'll have coffee with you. So we made plans to do that. We had a lovely conversation. We ended up connecting and really talking a lot about Asian food. I happen to love Asian food. And she said, have you been to Flushing, Queens? And I said, no, I haven't. She said, it's like traveling to China without getting on a plane. I would love to take you to lunch. That's where I grew up. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'd never been. That's such a lovely offer. And some people offer and don't follow up. This young woman followed up. And we had to postpone one time and she followed up again. We were going to have lunch. I'm like, okay, great. I joined her. We had a lovely lunch. She took me around the neighborhood. We went to this downstairs basement labyrinth where we got dumplings. It was quite the adventure. I think I was helpful to her, talking about networking and how she would get her new job. Quiet for about a month or two. And then I get an email from her that says, I saw there was a call for speakers for TEDx, and I'd like to nominate you.
Wow.
And I had never brought up the topic of a TED Talk with her. but it had always secretly been on my bucket list. And so I said, please do nominate me. I got selected. I have never prepared for anything more. And it was because of this young woman. I didn't expect anything from her. And yet she gave me a beautiful gift, something that I would not have been exposed to had she not drawn my attention to it. In
Yeah.
my preparation for this TED Talk, I decided to reach out to a millennial friend who had done one when she was 18. And I asked
Wow.
her advice. How did you prepare? And I got the very best advice I could have gotten. She gave me so many tips. She set me up on a routine of practice and rehearsal. And honestly, I would have not done as well if I hadn't reached out to this young woman for the advice I got.
Those are both amazing stories. And your TED Talk is absolutely phenomenal. I think I've heard it at least a few times.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I did practice a lot.
You talked about there is a way to approach senior leaders. So could you talk a little bit about that?
The best way, to be honest, is through a warm referral. So if you know someone that this person also knows, that makes a big difference. So when somebody that I know suggests that I meet with someone, already that has my attention. The person sometimes checks with me if they don't know me well, but if somebody doesn't check with me, they usually know me well, and they make that connection, I already have trust. So trust is an important part of the equation, right?
Right.
You want to trust a referral. So if you don't have a warm referral, how do you find that next level of trust, a good approach? You have to do some research. I think LinkedIn is the best tool out there for doing a little bit of research on somebody's background.
True.
Having something in common with someone makes a difference. If you went to the same college, if you worked at the same place, referring to that actually helps and matters. I was once in my office long ago, and my assistant had already left, and I got a phone call and I picked it up myself. And there was a quivering voice of a young man who said that he reached out to me, and the only thing we had in common was we grew up in the same town in northern New Jersey. And honestly, the fact that he reached out and that he knew that and he used that spoke to me. I ended up spending 45 minutes on the phone with this young man, and I tried to offer him advice on his career. And good for him for reaching out. Good for him for being brave for doing that. And I absolutely encouraged him to continue on that journey. So if you have none of that,
Right.
all right, you're going very cold. You still have to have a reason. And you can't just say, let's connect. It has to be much more. I actually did another similar event, and I had 3 people reach out, and each one said, thank you so much for that event. I really enjoyed something. Then I'm very happy to connect and follow up because there's more. Already they put a little bit of effort into it. So you have to, if it's on LinkedIn, I think you have to say why. I watched your TED Talk. It was terrific. I'd love to hear more about what you think. That actually works for me. Okay. I read your article. I'm aware of this is what your company's doing. I find it fascinating. This is the area I'd like to be in. Would you spend 20 minutes? Don't ask for an hour, but allocate an hour just in case it goes long, which is what you're hoping for. Don't ask for much and make it convenient for the person. And then show humility, indicate that you want to learn from them. I think that appeals to most people.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful lesson, Pat, because it's not about impressing them. It's not about you. It's about them.
Yes.
Which is such a reframe because we often think of networking as self-promotion. And
Right.
what you're saying is that this is the exact opposite.
This
Be
is the opposite.
humble in order to approach and be curious, right? In terms of trying to get that conversation going, which works a lot better than trying to impress someone. You talk about networking much more from a building relationships perspective. And so there is a longevity to what you're saying. And so how do you actually go from those initial awkward conversations, perhaps finding something in common, to a much longer relationship of mutual benefit and respect?
I think there are a number of ways to do that. And one of them is just, as I mentioned before, staying top of mind. So trying to find useful things that you can share with the other person so that they think about you more often. And there's real value in that. And especially if you can find something that you know they have an interest in. They've expressed that they have an interest in this. And so you're creating that opportunity. I think you can also invite people to events. And that's another way to make it less awkward and a little bit easier. A young woman in my network actually gave me some excellent advice. She's a very busy investor, venture capitalist, and she absolutely believes in the value of building, a broad network. And she can't meet with people one-on-one, nor can she reconnect with them as often as she'd like. So she has a strategy. Once a month, she has a breakfast to which she invites 8 to 10 people who she thinks would benefit from knowing one another. She gets to spend time with each of those 8 to 10 people. So she's top of mind. And
What a
they're
great
grateful to her
idea.
for those connections.
That's a wonderful idea, Pat. Wonderful idea.
A woman I met at an event that I described led me to an advisory role I got. She started a company and now I'm an advisor to her company.
Wow.
If I hadn't gone to that breakfast, none of that would have happened.
Pat, if someone's starting their networking journey today, right, and they're trying to build their stakeholder map, they're trying to figure out what their strategy should be, right, between digital and physical and, all of that stuff, how would you ask them to go about it?
Sure. Well, I say this in my book and I really believe it. The first person you have to start with is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to spend a little time and think about what is important to you. What do you hope to accomplish? What are your own strengths and weaknesses? In 3 to 5 years, what does success look like for you? You always have to kind of plan forward and then work backward. And then I also say, start with what's in a way comfortable and easy. Don't go for the hard cold call first. Don't go for the one person you really want to talk to more than anybody in the whole wide world as your very first outreach.
Right.
Talk to people who are within your group at your firm. Talk to classmates that you have or people who are close to you. Kind of tap into the close circle first and then expand from there. Because basically what you're doing is you're practicing. You're practicing your pitch. You're practicing the way you present yourself. You're practicing your ability to ask good questions and to listen thoughtfully. There are different people who are going to give you different things as part of this journey. They're going to be more experienced people who could be your mentors or your advisors. There are people who are your inspiration. These are the 3 people that whenever I get together with, I am like so excited because they have ideas to share. They have books they've read, movies they've gone to, restaurants they've gone to. They're really treasure troves of kind of knowledge. I went to an event recently and there was a young man there. People weren't talking to him. He was a diverse young man and said to myself, I'm going to talk to him. I want to find out about him. And I went up and I said, no, hi, tell me about yourself. Just a simple tell me about yourself. I had the most interesting conversation with this young man. In fact, we linked in, we followed up, we continued to talk. He was looking for additional job opportunities. I gave him some ideas. He ended up getting the job with the firm that he was with.
Wow.
So now I see him even more often.
And to your point, there is a generosity there, right? There is a generosity of making the connections and not always sort of hoping for something in return immediately, but sort of doing
That's
it
right.
because, good things add up.
Good things do add up. I remember a story of a young woman several years ago who wanted to work at a hospital more than anything else. This was where she wanted to work. And she applied for the job, no response. They didn't get the job. She actually went and decided to volunteer at the hospital. And as she's having the volunteer interview, somebody overheard her. And when she left that, said, we'd like to interview you for a job. Why are you volunteering? The fact that she showed up and decided to volunteer just to be at the place she wanted to be, huge credit to her.
When you look back at some of the most maybe unexpected conversations that you may have had, does anything stand out for you in terms of a conversation that led to maybe some learning or led to a lifelong connection, or perhaps one that was just really surprising for you?
There are so many conversations that led to things that I would not have expected. I'll tell you one conversation. When I was first recruiting for jobs, I interviewed with a man, and he called me later on the day to say that I would not get the job. But he did it in such a nice way that I always had a fond feeling for this individual. What do you know? 2 years later, he's the banker selling to me on the other side of the table. Several years after that, he ended up buying a home next to my home. Years after that, when I was in my external human capital role, he came to me for job advice. Years after that, we invested in a company together. And he told me no, he rejected me from a job.
It's almost like tapping into the power of serendipity to connect dots that are unexpected in some kind of magical way in the universe, which is, I think, the coolest lesson of networking.
I think it is.
So many more questions for you, Pat. We've tried to put all of those questions together in a short, rapid fire round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
First question. What's your favorite song?
My favorite song is The Man by Taylor Swift.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Tell me why.
Oh my gosh, all you have to do is listen to it. Well, she happens to be my favorite artist, and I have huge admiration for her for a number of reasons. One is because I think she's an incredible businesswoman.
Yes.
I also think she is very innovative and creative, and she is tremendously hardworking. And I admire somebody with that kind of a work ethic. And I also think she is, just in every interview that I've observed, just lovely and polite and kind. And I think it's hard to fake that. So I believe it's genuine, and I admire it.
Fantastic answer. What's your favorite book? Perhaps a book that's changed your life?
Atomic Habits by James Clear. I think your habits make you. And I love the way he outlines stacking habits, like do one thing that you are already doing and put another thing on top of it. And therefore, it doesn't seem as burdensome. So I like to indoor bicycle while watching a Netflix movie. And so I very much look forward to indoor bicycling because I don't watch Netflix otherwise.
That's such a great example. I mean, I do podcasts while walking. So, that's
exactly.
And it totally makes it worthwhile. What is one piece of career advice that you've received that's really helped you in your career? And what's one piece of career advice that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
One lesson that I learned from my mom, who was an entrepreneur, is that you have to treat everyone with respect, whether the person is in a very, prominent position or the person is not. Treat them with the same amount of respect. She also said, don't take things too personally. Wear a raincoat. Let some of it dribble off you. The advice I would give for anyone, I will not surprise you, is to go meet people, to go and be proactive about building relationships and building your network. It pays off.
Your TED Talk certainly is absolutely phenomenal, as is your book, Pat, Meet 100 People.
I'm so glad. It's very gratifying when people appreciate the message. And I thank you so much for doing that.
The myth that networking is for extroverts. And I think, you have such a different and interesting take on networking. You think of yourself as naturally reserved, but intentionally curious. And that is such a life lesson for any of us who have any reluctance about networking, to just think of it differently as building lifelong connections that power our careers, power our learning, and power our growth. So thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure and a privilege to have you join us and share your wisdom with our listeners. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's truly been my pleasure.